Chapter 25, Culmination 1. Chapter 11, Culmination 1. 1997, 1998. Percy is 21 and 34, Severus is 36, Harry is 17, and Dumbledore no longer lives. July 1997, considering that Percy had lived once through the revelation that Severus Snape murdered Albus Dumbledore in cold blood, he reflects after a few days that he ought to have been more prepared for the ensuing chaos. Oh, he'd expected the public mourning, mass sobbing in the streets, scores of people calling in sick, ragged groups of Hogwarts alumni making pilgrimages to the castle despite the clear and present risks, and the spectacles, though admittedly he'd forgotten about the Dumbledore impersonators causing havoc across the British Isles. Rita Skeeter's book hits the shelves on schedule, and Percy purchases a copy, though it sits unread on his desk. But he hadn't considered how the Dark Lord's followers might be taking the news that their hated enemy had finally been disposed of, once and for all. Percy attends only one of the revels, and nearly is sick all over his new robes at the wild, jubilant carnage gleefully enacted by dark wizards feeling gloriously unshackled by proprietary. He'd expected some dirty looks, too. But in this timeline, everyone knows the middle Weasley child is a dark wizard, or something approaching it. The photos of Percy heroically saving Scrimgeour have had the opposite effect than Percy had hoped, namely that half the wizarding population seems sure Percy had been instrumental in the minister's death. Percy's flat is warded enough to forestall most of the owls he receives, though he continues to let Errol through and subsequently has no choice but to read the small scrolls from his twin brothers and parents, each in a very different tone, but both very difficult to read. His office at the ministry, however, remains under a deluge of owls, some critical, some ingratiating, all unwelcome, until Percy, in a fit of pique, casts a strong animal-repelling charm that causes even a family of mice living in Mathilda's old desk to flee with haste. Percy attends Dumbledore's funeral with more than a mild headache, wondering grumpily why the Dark Lord even bothered to allow Dumbledore the honor, considering the wizarding world is nominally Voldemort's already. He arrives early and takes a seat next to Thickness in the front row, unwilling to make even a perfunctory effort at socializing with whoever deemed it wise to attend such a fraught event. Throughout the service, Percy stares silently at Dumbledore's bone-white tomb, thinking of the Elder Wand and the tremble in Severus' shoulders, and a dark-haired 16-year-old, his face filled twisted with hurt, bitter rage. Behind him, the gathered crowd rustles and whispers like grass exhaling and inhaling with the earth's steady breaths. Harry is in the crowd somewhere, his green eyes dark with sorrow and hatred. So are the rest of his siblings, and both of his parents, and the rest of the order besides. Percy does not turn to check. Better if he does not see their faces, though whether the precaution is for plausible deniability or his own mental fortitude, he cannot say. After the mermaids pay tribute, and the centaurs salute, and Hagrid's foghorn sobbing ripples through the still summer air, Pew stands to give his first official speech as minister. The crowd watches him without much interest. As Percy had predicted, Dumbledore's death is far more interesting than Scrimgeour's, though Scrimgeour is one of only 4 ministers killed in the line of duty. We are gathered here today to mourn the death of a great man. Percy has not yet imperioused Pew's. Pew's is a thin, reedy man with dark hair and an unseemly goatee, and he seems to be stupid enough to genuinely believe the Wizargamot voted him to replace Scrimgeour. Percy doesn't know exactly how Lucius and Yaxley managed to tamper with the official voting results, but he has no doubt that Pew's was not even on the docket, let alone the clear winner. Shacklebolt seems to be taking his loss well. He'd volunteered to liaison with the Muggle minister, which seems like a fruitless thing to do and an excellent way to draw negative attention to himself. But perhaps the Order has some plan that Percy does not know about that necessitates close contact to the Muggle government. Severus is not at the funeral, of course. Percy longs to speak with him, but Severus had not responded to Percy's messages, each agonizingly constructed. Percy can only imagine what he is feeling, the roiling mix of shame and guilt and self-righteous anger. It saddens him, and the empty page in their linked notebooks saddens him even more. Hogwarts will mourn its leader but will not give in to grief. Many in the wizarding world are also likely asking themselves the question, what next? It is a very good question, and one that Percy does not have the answer to any more than anyone else. Dumbledore is dead. Harry is vulnerable. The Dark Lord spends most of the year chasing after him, Percy supposes, but he can't imagine it would really take Tom an entire year to find one 17-year-old boy if that had been his sole focus. What else is the Dark Lord seeking? What will Tom? The Ministry will remain strong. I vow to you that we will do what it takes to prosper, to rise like phoenixes from the ashes. Percy winces at that last metaphor. That hadn't been in the materials he'd prepared for Pew's. Perhaps he will have to Imperious the man sooner than planned. Finally, Pew's is finished, and the crowd applauds tepidly. Percy will have to work with Pew's. He's not a strong public speaker, nor particularly appealing to look at. The first order of business will be a proper haircut and some new robes. Everyone at the Ministry seems to be holding their breaths, waiting for a horde of masked Death Eaters to storm the castle and take the king. Lucius knows better than that, Percy expects. Last time it had taken months, a series of small but purposeful moves, to strip the freedom of movement and magic from their society. Bandages loosely tie together link by link until they tighten with a snap. As Percy had said to the Dark Lord, the transition to the Dark Lord's reign will seem more natural if it comes from a genuine place. The wizarding world, or at least the British corner of it, is in shock today and will doubtlessly be in shock tomorrow, but forced to contend with an obvious intruder, and their shock could easily turn to anger. And Percy notices they are looking to him for cues on how to respond. It makes sense. He has served 3 ministers now, and he is a Weasley, but he's the Dark Weasley, isn't he? Percy walks through the halls and hears the whispers stop abruptly. He promotes himself to senior undersecretary. He may as well get the raise he deserves if he's going to suffer the infamy. With the extra money, he goes out and refurbishes his wardrobe, buying silk robes lined with gold fringe. To anyone that asks, he smiles thinly and reminds them that everyone that does their job well can be assured of success, and anyone who may be tempted to slack ought to consider alternate employment, from junior assistant to senior undersecretary in 3 years. Not too shabby, if he does say so himself. Maybe this time next year he can claim the Prowet's seat on the Wisengamot and really get started on his career. But while Percy is planning and scheming and worrying about the state of Pew's hair, the timeline is inexorably changing around him, so slowly and so insidiously that he nearly does not notice until it is too late. The first sign that something is wrong is when Percy tries to apparats into Grimmauld Place the night after the funeral and is met with what feels like a solid brick wall. Coughing, he picks himself up from the floor of his flat and tries again. Still nothing. Percy knows very clearly that the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix are at number 12 Grimmauld Place, but he can't seem to fix his mind on the location to apparate. When he tries to send Tonks a coded message, folded into a delicate swan and sent on lily-white paper, she sends him back an envelope filled with its ashes. When he goes by her desk later that afternoon, he's informed by the nervous trainee filling her desk that she'd quit. Percy does not want to risk sending Andromeda a letter nor arriving at her doorstep unless strictly necessary, but neither black woman makes any effort to contact him, which makes him feel strangely hurt. Priscilla Diggory similarly closes the door in his face when he arrives late on Saturday night, a similarly coded letter in hand, for her to smuggle to Cedric. She does not bother to open the door even to his pleas, and then finally he turns and marches away, though not before dropping a small package on her doorstep, containing some books that Percy would claim had been Amos and found in the minister's office, had anyone followed him and questioned his presence at her doorstep. Percy does not risk contacting any of his family members, of course, nor does he have any idea of how to communicate with McGonagall without access to headquarters. Thus stymied, Percy resorts to nagging Severus until the other man finally agrees to meet with him in his house, given they are the only 2 keyed into the wards. It would probably not do to regularly meet there, but Percy has been branded a Death Eater by dark and light wizards alike, so he does not think it particularly unwise to be seen consorting with Severus Snape. Except, he supposes, looking at Severus' deeply lined face, Severus murdered Albus Dumbledore, so even among dark wizards, he would not be considered particularly safe company. Percy wavers with the idea of asking after Severus' health, but he values his own too highly to open what will undoubtedly be a conversational game of exploding snap. Instead, he tries for a less controversial topic. We need to speak to Harry. We need to know what Dumbledore told him. Severus looks tired and haggard. The bloody mutt, he hisses out heatedly. We should have killed him ourselves. If he's called on black family magic, we've no hope of entering headquarters. Do you think they are well? I don't know why they thought it necessary to flee so suddenly. Severus does not care. Or rather, it would be more accurate to say Severus does not care about Harry Potter's well-being for the present, because Severus is incandescent with rage now that Dumbledore's portrait has awakened and revealed to him some key truths. He expects me to help him behind the scenes, Severus spits out angrily. Behind the scenes. It would help, one would think, if Potter did not think me a murderer. What of the wand? Percy asks impatiently. Draco disarmed Albus, Snape confirms. Albus looks surprised, too. I think he was expecting me to do it. Of course, it matters not if Draco is the master of the Elder Wand if we cannot hope to orchestrate a situation where Potter defeats him. That's the least of our worries, says Percy, flapping his hand. And you're sure the sword is not a Horcrux? Percy had quietly kept the contents of Dumbledore's will, the snitch and the little muggle toy in the book, at least. He tried to bring them to the burrow, but the house had been quiet and empty, the windows creaking in the wind, with only his parents to fill the multiple groaning floors. Percy had tried every spell in the book, but had to finally conclude that the ghastly figure with red hair peeping out of the top floor window was none other than their ghoul, having a bit of fun. If I cannot recognize a Horcrux by now, I do not deserve to be hunting them, Severus spits out, prickling visibly. I do not know why Albus wanted Potter to have it, and his bloody portrait won't speak. All he says is that it's important for me to give it to the boy, which again would be easier if I had a way to track him. Severus pauses and then spits out angrily. He still does not trust me. I believe he told Potter precisely what all 6 Horcruxes are, but he still will not say the word to me, nor validate my suspicions. And before? Percy asks urgently, seeing from the flaring of Severus' nostrils that the window in which to extract useful information is fast closing. You said before you had something you needed to tell me. This has the unprecedented effect of stopping Severus in his tracks, despite what undoubtedly is an unstoppable swell of rage building inside his body. Severus shakes his head and sighs and looks suddenly very old. The boy must die and the Dark Lord must do it. What? Severus nods disgustedly, like a pig for slaughter. Percy's mind flits furiously around everything that he knows about Harry Potter, but all he can say is, but why? I think it must be the prophecy, says Severus heavily. Either must die at the hand of the other. Perhaps Albus does not truly think the boy can win in a fight against the Dark Lord and wishes to martyr him at the appropriate time. And once the Dark Lord murders Harry, we're supposed to what? Carry on with the rest of our lives? Percy demands angrily. If he kills Harry, the war will be over, Horcruxes or no. People are barely resisting the Death Eaters as it is. It takes Percy by surprise in this timeline. Life does not change very much for the average pureblood wizard, at least those willing to publicly fall in line with the new rhetoric. He supposes that is precisely the point. For all of the Dark Lord's strength, there are not enough Death Eaters to quell a serious uprising, but there are plenty to track down the Muggleborns unable to flee or fight. Percy finds himself a bit disappointed in the lack of outrage over the cessation of one's civil liberties. In the last timeline, Percy had agonized over every decision, feeling privately at night that he was nothing more than a traitor. In this timeline, he is not so self-absorbed that he fails to notice how nonchalantly many of the purebloods take the regime change. Severus clenches his jaw angrily. I am retelling only what Albus told me. Percy shakes his head, feeling his heart begin to beat combatively in his chest, a flush starting behind his ears and stealing into his cheeks. Well, I didn't listen to Dumbledore when he was alive, and I'm not about to start now. Weasley? No, says Percy firmly. In my timeline, Harry defeated the Dark Lord. Perhaps it was the Elder Wand. Merlin knows Dumbledore couldn't have imagined Harry would wind up owner of it. Presumably Dumbledore gave Harry the ring, which makes him the master of death, according to the myths at least. If Harry has to face the Dark Lord, he'll do it at the end, after we've gotten the rest of the Horcruxes, and I won't hear anything contrary, and that's final." For a few seconds, the two wizards stare at each other, both taken aback by the fervor and finality in Percy's tone. Percy has a moment of dawning horror when he realizes he's snapped at Severus Snape like a first year, his hands on his hips like his mother. But at the same time, he digs around in his stomach for strength and finds a ring of steel, though tremulous, lining his rib cage. Percy did not travel back through time, kill two people, tangle with the Dark Lord, and have his mark branded forcibly onto his skin for Harry to die merely because a portrait of Albus Dumbledore decreed it so, and not even Severus could force him to change his mind. Finally, Severus shakes his head, and something like a smile crosses his pale, thin lips. "You're a bit like her, you know. My mother," Severus snorts. "No, though now that you mention it, I see rather a strong resemblance there as well. Number Lily." Percy drops his hands from his hips, feeling as if the breath had been knocked abruptly out of his stomach. What do you mean?" Severus' eyes turn inward as he recalls a memory private to him, which makes Percy feel acutely as if he were intruding on a horridly personal moment. "She made up her mind quickly, more quickly than you, I'd say. And once she did, she couldn't be budged, not for hell nor for high water." Percy flushes. "I do too make up my mind," he defends weakly, scrabbling wildly in the air for something to say that would relieve the sudden intensity and awkward intimacy entrapping the two wizards like a net in the sky to catch pixies. Severus raises an eyebrow. "I suppose it's my lot in life to be saddled with impetuous Gryffindors," he says with a gust of a sigh, sufficient to wash away the tension strung between them tautly. "Do you think you will be able to contact the boy? I do not dare try and expose myself." Percy thinks dispiritedly of his failure to find the Horcruxes but gives a tiny nod. "We have no other choice." Quite. At least Percy is almost positive he knows exactly where Harry is. The only trouble is finding a way to talk to the blasted boy. The Dark Lord's takeover of the ministry looks something like this. First, elect a new minister, one that is malleable and easy to control. Install a Death Eater under him, but a Death Eater who seems like he may not be a Death Eater, so that those suspecting foul play are left stymied. Then, over a course of a few months, ratchet up the intensity and deadliness of the Death Eater attacks, such that fear spreads like sticky honey over the country, and everyone's eyes are pinned to the ministry, hoping desperately that the government has a plan. Write a speech for the minister, in which he strongly denounces terrorism and reiterates the ministry's commitment to power and might. Introduce a new set of department heads, and slip in a new set of departments, chosen for their tenacity, their vision and focus, and their strength. Do not mention that these department heads all have silver circlets on their upper arms. Let them bear their forearms and exist above reproach. Pass, by wildly popular measure, martial law, which allows the minister to create a special branch of auras given license to arrest without justification. Correspondingly, create a system of trials so that the misbehaving and criminals will be punished accordingly. Sacrifice a few lower-level Death Eaters so that the public thinks the task force is truly out for their best interest. Ruling by fear is not tenable, though the Dark Lord often indicates it is preferable. Percy pushes for these measures, not because he believes them to be ineffectual, but because he hopes that he is saving lives by moving the battlefield to the government and away from the streets. Only hindsight will tell him if he succeeds. Stage a private takeover of the Daily Prophet. Do not yet change the content unduly. Subtlety is key. But redirect the focus to hammer in that the only possible positive outcome to this war is a show of power by either side. Stoke fears of defeat, but dangle the hope of victory, the best combination to keep the people compliant. The later methods, pardoning the Death Eaters unfairly accused of treachery, shifting the focus of the trials toward Muggleborns, even redecorating the ministry, all of those are slated for the coming weeks. Give people time to adapt. The Dark Lord is not cruel, after all, but rather merciful, and the Dark Lord is not particularly concerned with Harry either. It surprises Percy, at first, although he supposes that the Dark Lord's apparent nonchalance does not take root until after Percy inadvertently gives him an excuse to focus on other things. It is Percy, after all, who obediently reports to the Dark Lord that Harry Potter is holed up at the Black family manor in London with his blood traitor godfather. Percy does not mention Ron nor Hermione, and the Dark Lord does not ask. He has only ever cared for Harry. Anyone else is a distraction. Percy would have liked to speak to Andromeda to confirm the strength of the Black Wards, but when he finally musters up the courage to go by her house, he finds it silent, empty, and dark, without any trace of any of the Tonks. He can only hope they went somewhere proactively and were not taken unwillingly, though he rather thinks he would have heard of it if they had. The most likely outcome is that they too are with Harry, though Remus Lupin is still at large, according to Severus, nosing his way into any number of werewolf encampments in a futile effort to win them over to the Order's side with the power of love and good feeling. But the Dark Lord had demanded Percy find out where Harry is, through any force necessary, and far too many of Percy's siblings remain frustratingly in the open, even after Percy forces the twins into hiding. So Percy tells the Dark Lord the truth, and nothing but the truth. Harry Potter and his godfather are at 12 Grimmauld Place, but it is so heavily warded that nobody will be able to enter. The Dark Lord sends Narcissa and Draco to verify this, but even their black blood does not allow them to enter the wards that Sirius Black has somehow brought upon his house like an impenetrable curtain. Percy, his palms rather more moist than he'd like, nervously suggests to the Dark Lord that he let Harry be. "We know exactly where he is," points out Percy nervously, "and you cannot apparate inside the house, according to Narcissa, so he can't leave unless he walks out of the front door. And honestly, having Potter locked up there will be for the best." He pauses, anticipating a curse, but none comes. The Dark Lord rests one hand on his snake, drumming his long, thin fingers contemplatively on the scaled skin, but otherwise looking at Percy with some interest. Percy resists the urge to wipe his hands on his robes and continues, "Right now, there's a lot of outrage and fear over Dumbledore, my lord. I fear that murdering the boy, rather than quelling a potential rebellion, might tip the rebels into outright opposition. In 6 months or a year's time, everyone will have forgotten about Potter. At that time, we can force him out, kill him quietly, and leave his body for all to see." The Dark Lord's mouth stretches into that grotesque, thin smile, but Percy subdues a flinch with ease. Percy is not even tortured for this suggestion, and as he bows his way out of Voldemort's presence, it strikes him with a discordant clang that the Dark Lord seemed relieved at the knowledge he not yet face his next most hated foe. Almost as if absolved from a difficult round of exams, the Dark Lord is thereafter gleeful, nearly giddy, accompanying privileged groups of Death Eaters to murder Muggles, leaving the manor openly for the first time. Lucius Malfoy invites Percy for a drink during one of those times, and it is as if a dark cloud has lifted off Malfoy Manor, though all parties are perfectly aware the reprieve is limited. To his surprise, Percy does not entirely dislike the Death Eaters. When their master is out, they lounge self-assuredly on the elegant chaise chairs, gleefully sparring with each other, their weapons of choice wit and sly comments rather than disembowelment charms and dark curses. They seem to enjoy Percy, too. Lucius and Yaxley and the rest all seem to think of him as a pet, a stray Gryffindor that wandered into their lair. Lucius glances sideways at his robes, the first time Percy appears for one of these little chats, despite the gold trim. And the next day an owl delivers an exquisitely wrapped package with 4 sets of dress robes, all considerably nicer than anything Percy has ever owned, even with Aunt Muriel's help or the gold levied by the Philosopher's Stone. Yaxley teaches Percy how to distinguish between fine elf wine and the shardier goblin variety, and even Bulstrode, a quiet man with a sunken face but an electric tongue when he gets going, gives him a small book of common pureblood holidays and their meanings. All Percy has to do is take the advice he is given and display understanding of it, and they seem almost flattered by his interest. Their own sons learned these tricks years ago, baked into their blood and the haughty set of their spines, and now that they have reached their majority, they do not have time for their fathers. Their sons are out with the Dark Lord while these wizards stay behind, no less evil nor dark, but separate nevertheless. Percy would think some of these sons may resent Percy for having the privileged attention of so many of their elders, but they are used to dining with society's richest and most powerful, and most do not seem to disdain Percy the scraps of their parents' attention. Lucius is not entirely cleared of derision, nor has he clawed his way back to the privileged seat at the Dark Lord's side that he used to occupy. But with Draco's triumph, he walks with his head held more high, and some of the characteristic swagger back in his strut. Percy can tell from his enthusiasm to discuss the ministry that Lucius, likely correctly, assumes that he has a small window of opportunity to decisively seize power from his competitors, namely Yaxley. Draco and Narcissa grow quieter as Lucius grows more confident. Percy can see that his small window of opportunity to spirit Draco away from this mess is nearly shut, if it is not already. Draco watches him sometimes with wide, scared eyes, but he avoids him otherwise, as he avoids the other Death Eaters invading his home. Percy waits for a moment alone with Draco and then asks, carefully, "Are you well?" Draco shoulders past him with more force than is strictly necessary. "Is anyone?" Tom, certainly, looks far from well, his painted face sallow and upset, though Percy notes with some unease that his portrait feels stronger every day, the corners of the frame sparking with magic, at times even when its occupant is not present. Severus and Percy have not further discussed when precisely they plan to rid themselves of the diadem Horcrux, but Percy is afraid it will have to be soon. He runs into his father once, in the cafeteria of the ministry. It takes Percy a few minutes to process that the man standing behind him in the line has graying red hair, but then he tenses, immediately on his guard, though he cannot resist the urge to reach out with his magic and assess his father's health. Decent, he supposes, stronger than before. People are almost certainly watching to see what he does. As long as one's bloodline is pure, one is allowed to continue working at the ministry, for now. But adherence to the new lord's political sensibilities implicitly allows some to rise above the rest. The two large, nasty-looking types sitting near the door and watching Percy with narrowed eyes are prime examples of newly hired ministry employees who wouldn't have had a hope of even receiving an interview just a few years ago. Percy gives his father one dismissive look and then turns back to look at the front. The safest thing is to say nothing and let people come to their own conclusions. People have not begun to denounce each other left and right, but it is likely to begin soon. But his father cannot resist. "Your mother misses you, Percy," he says softly. Percy's look of irritation is completely genuine. "She'd be better off channeling her activities into monitoring her other children," he says coldly. The woman in front of Percy looks back, and then just as quickly looks forward. Percy thinks he recognizes her as one of the people who typically check in visitor wands at the front desk. But in this new world, anyone could be an enemy, and so despite the way that his stomach is grumbling, Percy steps neatly out of line and says, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It's really not done to dine with blood traitors, don't you think?" and walks away as imperiously as he can, ignoring the way that his heart is beating as if it may stop at any moment. Tom looks very much alive, in a way that speaks more to the success of his extracurricular activities, rather than to Percy's skill as an artist. It has been quite a while since Percy recognized his own brushwork in Tom's form. His hair falls over his forehead with realistic curls, and shoulders tense visibly with emotion, and his pale cheeks flush suddenly with rage. When Tom paces in his portrait, Percy rather fancies he can hear the footsteps echoing. But what makes Tom seem unwell is the crazed glint in his eyes, and the way that his eyebrows draw together, and how the corners of his lips compress until they begin to resemble his older, serpentine self. What makes Tom seem unwell is the way that he has begun to recite, out loud, the locations of the other Horcruxes to Percy, as if searching for the same clues that Percy has been trying to divine for years with little luck. He asks Percy again, desperately, whether the sword of Gryffindor proved to be fruitful. He forces Percy to review his notes on the life of Regulus Black, in case they missed another clue, and he thinks through all of his other plans, as if so desperate to find the sixth Horcrux that he is willing to expose himself thus to Percy. It flatters Percy, a little, and reminds him of the old intimacy once shared with Tom. But anxiety remains the prevailing feeling for Percy, even as he listens with interest, as Tom shares some of his journey into the old and dark magics across the world. It is from Tom in these moods that Percy learns how Tom found Hufflepuff's cup one day during another humiliating house call forced upon him by the smirking Borgin, who considered himself above consorting with pathetic, wealthy women. It is from Tom that Percy hears again of Myrtle's death, and of Tom's father and his grandparents besides. Percy faithfully records these stories to Severus, but neither of them can see what this Voldemort might have done, brought back to life by Pettigrew and Crouch. Just as the rest of society is letting out a hesitant exhale, Lucius orders Percy to appoint Dolores Umbridge as the head of the Muggle-born Registration Committee, and Percy finds the locket of Slytherin. September 1997, Dolores Umbridge. Tom repeats outraged. Umbridge. She doesn't even sound like a pureblood. She's not, Percy confirms darkly. Umbridge goes to great pains to conceal her heritage, but Percy had investigated her thoroughly when he learned she was a quasi-Death Eater. Pureblood mother, Muggle-born father, no siblings. Parents had died when Umbridge was quite young, and she had been raised by some great-aunt or another, an obvious parallel that Percy finds easy to ignore, though he of course notes it in case he has to invoke a shared similarity with her to win her trust. Tom scoffs loudly. Percy half expects spittle to fly from the surface of the canvas and land wetly at his feet, so great is Tom's disdain. And she's wearing it in public. Where is he? Why is he allowing this? He is celebrating Dumbledore's death, Percy says archly. He shares a look of incredulity with Tom. If Tom had celebrated Dumbledore's death, he'd done so in the privacy of his portrait when Percy wasn't there. Percy would hazard a guess that Tom resented that Severus was the privileged one to kill Dumbledore. Percy cannot say that he disagrees. The Dark Lord could have required Severus to capture Dumbledore. He could have walked into Hogwarts, killed Dumbledore, and walked out without anyone being the wiser. He would have become the master of the Elder Wand. Of course, Percy had thought at the time there were advantages to have the great Albus Dumbledore felled by his loyal servant, but Percy has seen the Dark Lord kill multiple wizards for insulting his pride. The only conclusion that Percy can really draw is that, even at the end, the Dark Lord was afraid that Dumbledore may defeat him, which is certainly the conclusion that Tom has come to, and the one that enrages him so often. "Get it back," Tom orders, eyes narrowed into slits. "Now." The problem, of course, is that Percy cannot rip it from her neck, nor can he imperious her, given that both of them are being watched with an eagle eye. Percy is congratulated formally by the Dark Lord when he burns down the twins' joke shop with enchanted flames that still flicker weeks later. He had been masked, but he'd made sure that Lucius, who had accompanied him, had seen Fred and George recognize him. Their looks of betrayal had seared, but their shop was not raided by more dangerous wizards, and with signs like "You-know-poo" up in the windows, that was not a certainty. Percy also hesitates, because he cannot help but wonder if Voldemort himself gave her the locket as a way to control her. Surely otherwise he'd notice that a prominent ministry employee was openly wearing his Horcrux. Clearly, whatever Regulus had tried had failed, which makes Percy feel deeply saddened for that young, bright-eyed boy whose room is now locked away for good. Giving Umbridge the Horcrux would be reckless, but the Dark Lord is being reckless, so convinced he is that his reign will be absolute. This way, part of him would also be able to participate in the Muggle-born cleansing process. Percy can imagine that the Dark Lord intends for the Horcrux to completely possess Umbridge and then install itself as minister. So no, Percy does not immediately rush to apprehend Umbridge, but he does inform Severus, and he does appoint himself her senior scribe. This is, unfortunately, a position very familiar to him, and it is no easier to write the proceedings of each trial because he recognizes the details. In fact, it is almost worse, given that in this timeline he made a token effort to save some of these people. He knows their names, their birthdays, their families, their Hogwarts graduation years. He hopes that Scrimgeour is off working with McGonagall and Tonks somewhere, but there are still so many Muggle-borns and other blood traitors who show up for their trials, so many to send to Azkaban, so many to plaster across posters. Some of the victims of these trials were warned, as far as he knows. He wonders why they were stupid enough not to run. He wonders, too, Does the appearance of this Horcrux mean the Dark Lord is actively making more? Can he even bear to split his soul again? Will he just destroy himself? How can they ever be sure? Tom walks Percy through the best way to imperious pews. It is an odd experience to work with Tom now. He is unerringly helpful and polite, as if to prove to Percy by force that he cares deeply about him. Percy is equally friendly in return, as if to reassure him that he has no intention of destroying the sixth Horcrux once it is discovered. Something about their shared artifice saddens Percy, though he tries not to dwell too long on why that may be. The best way to keep a constant curse over someone, Tom explains, is to give them simple but binding instructions. For instance, Percy tells Pews to act as normally as possible, to not reveal, hint, or otherwise insinuate that he is under a curse, to take no policy action without consulting with Percy, and to act as if he were a Death Eater. These instructions are surprisingly effective. They also have the side effect of making Percy a very visibly powerful person. Oh, nobody would dare postulate that Percy Weasley is controlling the Minister of Magic, but he did get several promotions in a small amount of time, and he does seem to have his fingers in a surprising number of pockets. The result is that Percy strides powerfully through the ministry for the first time in his life. His two assistants scurry after him nervously. He can quell them with a single derisive glance. When he meets Yaxley in the halls, for Lucius, much to the other man's disdain, has not yet been publicly pardoned. The other man treats him like an equal. Percy finds that he enjoys it, enjoys knowing more about the gears of the ministry than most, enjoys knowing that his words are being repeated across the country, even if those words are cruel and cutting. On his desk at home, he's working through an arithmancy equation to calculate the optimal number of instructions to incorrectly give Pews that will still allow Percy plausible deniability. Largely, a theoretical exercise, given that neither Lucius nor the Dark Lord have told Percy to do anything other than endorse all of their other plans. But Percy knows that before long either wizard will begin to ask Percy to flex the arm of the government more powerfully, and he wishes to be prepared. "You've made quite a name for yourself," Umbridge tells him one day, with the mutual admiration of someone equally hungry for power. She wasted no time in taking over Moody's cramped office, which is another thing that Percy wants to worry about if he ever has a second to breathe and add another concern to his list. He hadn't heard about Moody quitting, but maybe the man felt it safer to disappear quietly, without notice. He gives her the kind of smile he copied from Lucius Malfoy, all teeth. "I've learned from the best," he says meaningfully. "I was pleased to hear of your reappointment to the ministry. It has been frightfully dull this last year." "I admit I was peeved at first when Fudge fired me," Umbridge says, her toady lips widening into a smile. "But my sabbatical was quite informative. A shame to hear about Mr. Crouch. I must thank you for our introduction." Umbridge has been very silent about where she has been for the last 2 years, and Percy does not ask. "Excellent work on the Muggle-born registration committee," Percy continues, picking up a poster of Hermione Granger and regarding it thoughtfully. He does not want to speak about Crouch. "I am particularly impressed with how quickly you put together a list of suspects. It's obvious, once you know where to look," Umbridge says, preening. "Every Muggle-born is exposed the second they get their Hogwarts letter. The registry, of course." All of Percy's familiarity with the mythical Hogwarts registry, he'd forgotten it would be such an obvious security leak. But how did Umbridge get access to it? She must have done something during her tenure as headmistress of Hogwarts. Percy will have to inform McGonagall if he can figure out how to contact her now that Hogwarts is a fortress. Presumably she still trusts Severus, but he can't be sure. "And your command over the Dementors is exemplary. May I ask, what is your secret?" "I hate the creatures myself." Umbridge taps Hermione's face with a manicured finger. "The Dementors have a basic understanding of negotiations," she says with a light laugh. "They grow tired of feeding on the same feeble souls. They were quite willing to follow me once I explained to them that there would be a veritable feast waiting for them. Can they sense mudbloods, separately from muggles or wizards, I mean?" Umbridge wrinkles her brow and then gives a dismissive shrug. "I'm not sure they care." "They probably can." Percy will have to add it to the list of questions to ask his Dementor, though given that it has been pressed into work in these Muggle-born trials, Percy's access to it has been rather limited. The Dementor and its two companions dive and swoop like ravens, spewing mist that gathers rebelliously around the wispy white patroni, many of which are barely substantial. Dementors must be able to tell the difference between muggles and wizards, at the very least, and hadn't the Dementor been able to identify the life ward belonged to a wizard of his line? Perhaps souls in a family have similarity to each other, as odd as a concept as that is for Percy. Perhaps his father's soul and his share some sort of. Umbridge clears her throat with the obnoxious hem-hem that is her unfortunate trademark. Percy rolls his eyes but prepares his dictating charm, staring blackly at the locket, which taunts him. Sometimes when he looks at it, he hears the whisper of Tom's voice in his head, which he has not otherwise heard in months. Several times he's tried to prompt her to speak of it, but she always smiles mysteriously and evaricates with skill he would not believed of such an obvious woman. The muggle-born woman on trial looks like a normal woman in her 50s. Straggly, mousy brown hair, a face lined with worry but not age, her grey eyes watery and scared. She's put on some face makeup, obvious even to Percy's untrained eyes, as if the shaky black lines around her eyes would win her pity. If anything, they serve to underscore that she is muggle-raised. What witch wouldn't merely use a charm? "I got it at Ollivander's," she sobs, her eyes fixed on the wand clutched tightly between Umbridge's hands. "When I was 11, like everyone else." Percy grips his own wand tighter in sympathy. He has to watch impassively as these trials occur, but some of the victims are harder to ignore than others. He doesn't know why this woman, with her pitiable green robes and matching hat, is so much harder to block out. Perhaps because she is so clearly shocked, so sad, as if she didn't imagine that this trial could possibly happen to her. Percy loathes the people that are so blind to the obvious signs everywhere, but they are so pathetic he finds it hard to ignore their plights. She should have run the second she was summoned to this farce. If she were a halfway decent wizard, she could have made it out of Britain with 2 days of metered apparition. And if she were a muggle, well, Percy now knows there is a vast network of muggle transportation available, and he knows for a fact that the Death Eaters haven't yet thought to monitor them fully. "Do not lie to me," Umbridge says coldly. Mafalda, behind her, shifts uncomfortably. Percy eyes her from behind his scroll. She'd overseen the arrest of a 14-year-old boy yesterday without blinking an eye, so he isn't sure why the trial of Mrs. Cattermole would be any different. Percy doesn't even understand why Umbridge insists on trials. Yes, he'd advised the Dark Lord to launch his attack slowly, as to not ruffle feathers. A trap from the periphery is more effective than one clearly visible ahead. But the British society is not stupid. Nobody is found to be innocent during these exercises. Ministry might as well just declare it illegal to be a muggle-born and order capture on sight. It would certainly be cheaper. For every trial, Umbridge must preside over a minimum of 5 other wizards, all capable of producing patroni. Certainly not a given for the average wizard, in addition to at least 2 Azkaban guards and Percy. That makes a minimum of 9 salaries to be paid out merely to watch an exercise in futility, a mockery of justice, and neither Percy nor Yaxley come cheap. Yes, it is one thing to run an evil empire, but payroll still needs to process pay stubs, and budgets still need to be balanced, and it seems like all of the newly instated department heads are completely unaware of the logistics required to head a department. Yesterday, Percy had overheard one man in the lifts mentioning to his friend that his grandmother's birthday was the following Wednesday, but he wasn't sure if he was allowed to take the day off. Percy had wanted to laugh, or maybe cry. The wheels of bureaucracy turn on, and grandmothers live another year, and clueless pureblood wizards are capable of ignoring the cessation of other people's freedoms long enough to think about their balance of paid days off. A Dementor swoops close to the barrier, as if eager, and a chill drips wetly down Percy's back. He shivers and casts a warning charm, refocusing on the trial. Mrs. Cattermole is crying, and Yaxley is fingering his wand, as if also contemplating how his reward for serving the Dark Lord is to sit in a basement with Dolor's Umbridge while she viciously tears into muggle-born witches, or half-blood witches, as Cattermole is insisting desperately. Umbridge leans forward and Mafalda jumps. Percy's eyes snap to her immediately. That's pretty," the other witch says weakly. Umbridge preens, her fat fingers caressing the locket of Slytherin as if it were a cheap family heirloom. She babbles out some lie about the Selwyn family, as if, while Percy stares carefully at Mafalda. She's watching the locket hungrily, warily, and when her eyes flick up to meet Percy's, she blanches and drags her gaze away quickly. Mrs. Cattermole's husband strides in confidently, flanked by two stocky men that Percy believes are from the creature's registration division. Percy begins to rise instinctively, his eyes darting over each anomaly, something tugging at his mind. What is the meaning of this? Umbridge snaps angrily. Get out of here. These trials are private. Reg, cries Mrs. Cattermole in disbelief. Percy wastes a second looking at her in frustration. Does she really think her husband can save her from her fate at this point? She'd be better off using the distraction to run. Yaxley unbends his lanky body and pulls himself to his feet, twirling his wand between his fingers. He looks eager for action, and Percy can honestly not blame him. These trials are mind-numbing. Gentlemen, he says coolly, I would hate to resort to punitive action. The man to the left of Mr. Cattermole throws his head back and bares his teeth. Madam Umbridge has something of mine. Of yours, Yaxley repeats disbelievingly, as Umbridge's hand goes instantly to her throat. Percy carefully steps out of the small scribe box, gripping his wand. He thinks he knows what is happening here, though it is so tremendously stupid, so asinine and impulsive, so poorly executed that he wants to strangle the boy who lived and his godfather besides. He'd suspected this happened in the first timeline, but he'd never had it confirmed and had forgotten about the incident in favor of other more pressing matters. If Harry has access to Polyjuice Potion, why was this his plan? They could have transformed themselves into a cleaning squib, stunned Umbridge, and made off with the locket without anyone to be the wiser. Percy had considered it himself. Get reinforcements, Percy snaps at one of the guards. He hesitates, and Percy pins him with a cold and imperious glance, an amalgamation from the many terrifying men in his life, and the guard blanches and nods. Go with him, he orders to the other. The Dementors swoop lower, eagerly, as the guards leave and take their patroni with them. Mafalda has come to join the other three men, making it abundantly obvious to all parties precisely who is behind the Polyjuice. Yaxley and Percy meet each other's eyes. The Dark Lord would be very interested to know what is happening. Percy jerks his head to the side, hoping Yaxley will leave and go to Malfoy Manor, thus buying Percy some time, but Yaxley shakes his head cautiously. If it isn't Harry, they'll be punished severely. If it is Harry, that means that Harry has enough knowledge of the Horcruxes to identify the locket and plan an incredibly dangerous mission to retrieve it. Does that mean he knows of the others? He must. He may have already gone to the cave. Severus replaced the fake locket, including the note, and Sirius would have been able to put it together. What else do they know? Spellfire crashes out. Hermione, or Mafalda, very sensibly aims at the three remaining guards, felling them easily. Whichever of them is impersonating Reg Cattermole goes to his wife's side, while the other two, presumably Harry and Sirius, come to think of it, battle with Yaxley and Umbridge. Weasley, Yaxley calls out through gritted teeth, and Percy starts and sends a stunning curse toward Hermione, whom he privately believes is the most competent of the lot. They won't be able to apparate here, he shouts back to Yaxley, widening his eyes meaningfully as he engages in a lackluster duel with Hermione. Neither will the Dark Lord, though Voldemort almost certainly would be able to rip through the Ministry's wards if summoned. Hopefully Hermione registers that they too won't be able to apparate unless they go back upstairs. That's mine, you bitch, shouts one of the men. Sirius, Percy would guess, and lunges physically at Umbridge, knocking her to the floor. Yaxley sends a nasty purple curse at Sirius, who yelps in pain but lands heavily on Umbridge. Why would Sirius think the locket his? Regulus, perhaps. So they must have gone to the cave and learned of R.A.B. What else have these four been up to, equipped with Polyjuice? There's a scuffle. Ron and Harry seem to think Sirius' example was a positive one and throw themselves at Yaxley. For a second Hermione and Percy share a look full of mutual irritation, and then Hermione stuns him with an apologetic widening of her eyes. Bloody witch. He stares at the ceiling with irritation. Though his body is immobilized, he feels the chill spread over his chest and legs and seep into his fingers and toes as the Dementors swoop down in interest. His body may be still, but his mind spikes with panic. Surely they did not leave him to die. Faintly, distantly, Percy hears Harry roar an expecto patronum, and the Dementor above his prone body retreats temporarily as if stung. But all too soon, the black-robed creature appears in his field of vision, the mist building in Percy's open mouth, choking him on the frigid feeling of his own terror. The Dementor regards him thoughtfully, and for a single awful second Percy wonders if he'd been wrong, if this was not his Dementor, but another one entirely. But then the Dementor flips over and leaves him be. He's awoken in the next second and splutters back to life, his chest full and tight with the mist that snuck insidiously down into his lungs. He sits up, takes in the ministry guards with blurry eyes, and then realizes with a sickening lurch why the Dementors had ignored him. All three of them are bent over Umbridge, feeding on her. Her large body is tensed in terror, her fudgy fingers clenched into fists. Percy cannot see her face, but he can see her body lurch violently once as something leaves her body, and then the Dementors soar back into the rafters, content with their prize. He looks up and meets Yaxley's equally horrified gaze. For all that the other man is a murderer, he is also a wizard, and watching a creature feed on a witch's soul is enough to make even a Death Eater feel revulsion. The guards that woke Percy and Yaxley are quiet. There is nothing to say. Clearly something awful happened here. Clearly they will all be punished. Percy can already see what is to come. There is no need to mention it. But the trio and the locket are gone. Asterisk, it was Umbridge, Yaxley says to Percy the moment they are alone. You and I were not in the room. I've already taken care of the guards. Percy nods automatically. If Yaxley wants to cover their tracks, far be it for Percy to get in the way. We heard reports of a duel and came running, but it was too late. Potter had already left. How will we know it was Potter? Percy cannot help but interrupt to point out. I mean, if we weren't there and Umbridge was indisposed. Yaxley swallows and nods. His eyes are wide and his face stricken with panic. Perhaps he has never seen a dead body before. Certainly he's never contemplated lying to the Dark Lord. Despite himself, Percy feels almost sorry for the other man. We don't say anything, Percy says gently. We don't even know if it was Potter. But, intruders in the ministry, we were upstairs discussing our strategy for pews. After all, we do need to discuss the wording choice. I mean, magic is might. It was Lucius, Yaxley objects automatically, and the normalcy of the conversation seems to calm him. Some of his customary cool steel slides into place behind his dark eyes. Umbridge offended many, he agrees after a beat. We'll say it was a disgruntled mudblood. Pews can give a speech tomorrow. We might as well get rid of those blasted trials, Percy says, with more confidence than he feels. We both know they were a waste of time. After today, no mudblood that's managed to escape our notice in the ministry would dare answer a summons. Yaxley nods slowly, as if he's practicing how it will sound to the Dark Lord. Umbridge was unhinged, he says smoothly, his voice oily. We must have only the best serving our Lord. Percy inclines his head. I would have to agree. So that's sorted to an extent, though later that night it feels like Voldemort hammers individual nails into each vertebrae on his spine. The Cruciatus hums in delight and spreads like a web over his back, sending its creeping, probing fingers into the crevices between each bone. By the time it's over, Percy has bitten his tongue so hard that he swallows blood with every gasp. But Voldemort does not bother to use legilimency. He is distracted. Severus and Percy exchange a silent glance, watching as the Dark Lord reclines on his golden throne and stares thoughtfully into space. Whether it is the idea that intruders may have been in the ministry or something else entirely, Percy cannot tell. But the Dark Lord must not have known that Umbridge had the locket. Surely he would be far more agitated if he thought Harry now had one of his prized Horcruxes. Well, Severus asks after the meeting. They've chosen to meet in a Muggle town outside of London. Severus knows all sorts of seedy Muggle towns, apparently, and as they are both presumably being watched, they can hardly continue to meet at the riverbank, though Percy certainly prefers it to the grime of the local tavern. He discreetly casts a few cleaning charms on the stool and the bar and the glass, and then on himself for good measure. His magic is tired. It always is after a round of the Cruciatus. The last charm sulkily drips from his wand, and its effort is lackluster at best. Harry's got the locket, The real one. Umbridge had it. Fuck, says Severus with feeling. The curse is so unlike the man that Percy blinks at him in surprise. Severus, he notices, looks exhausted. How is Hogwarts? Severus answers with a single, cutting look that divulges much. The Carrows are absolutely unhinged, he says, disgusted, though some of his customary eloquence creeps back into his voice. To make matters worse, they are not unintelligent either. They watch me carefully. It has not escaped the Dark Lord's attention that my defeat of Dumbledore may give me airs. Not to mention the Dark Lord still expects me to provide him with all of the potions that he needs, which are seemingly innumerable. Where do they think you are now? A brothel, says Severus blandly. Percy chokes on his tea. He can't stomach alcohol after a night with the Dark Lord, and the left corner of Severus' lips quirk into a small smirk. I put a glamour on a muggle as he went in. They are, of course, disguised to not look like themselves, but Percy wouldn't have thought to plant a false trail on an unsuspecting muggle. He clearly has much still to learn about espionage. Well, if Harry's got the locket, he must know at least nominally about the Horcruxes, Percy continues, his cheeks still tinted red. I highly doubt he would have made it through the cave alone, so we can presume either Sirius or Dumbledore took him there. We know he learns at some point about the cup, since he breaks into Gringotts before the Battle of Hogwarts. He must know about the sixth Horcrux. Severus purses his lips. We cannot rely that he will know how to destroy the Horcrux. I managed to finagle out of Albus that he wants Potter to have the sword because it is impregnated with basilisk venom. Obviously, he plans for Potter to destroy each Horcrux with the sword, as if he were a bloody action hero. Basilisk venom can destroy a Horcrux, Percy asks in surprise. His mind roves over the applicable magical theory, and he nods slowly. I suppose, but Severus, the sword, I do not believe it is impregnated with venom. But Potter used it to slay the basilisk, did he not? Percy flushes and examines the rough wood grain of the table. Well, not exactly, he hedges. Severus stills. The air around Percy suddenly feels several degrees cooler. Explain. I was there that night, says Percy quietly, still not looking up. The table has a faint, sticky sheen, and Percy casts another cleaning charm that acts as desultorily as the last. Hiding. Tom brought me there. He wanted to use Ginny as bait for Harry Myrtle, and Dumbledore's phoenix saved us. I wanted it to look like Harry had defeated the basilisk, so I smeared it in his blood and left it in his hand. Severus' voice is cold as he demands, Why did you not tell me? I didn't think it was relevant, Percy says quickly. He looks at Severus' forbidding scowl and then sighs, reluctantly admitting, I was ashamed. I nearly got them all killed. All information is vital in a war, hisses Severus. You will get us all killed if you allow your infantile emotions to rule you. Aye, you're right, Percy concedes. He meets Severus' eyes bravely. I apologize for lying to you. I trust you, and I should act as such. For the briefest second, something passes behind Severus' black eyes, an expression of surprise, perhaps, or merely a discomfited blink. Then he gives a short, brusque nod. Thank you. We cannot rely on the sword. Our only recourse is to find Potter and retrieve both the locket and the identity of the final Horcrux. Now that he's hidden in headquarters, we cannot reach him. It is strange to feel the effect of the family wards now on the black ancestral home. The Fidelius is still active, and Percy knows perfectly well where it is. But if he tries to close his eyes and fix its location in his mind flows smoothly away from its knowledge. We will have to draw him out, Severus decides. They will eventually leave, I believe, if Death Eaters are stalking their doorstep at every opportunity. Or they will shelter more thoroughly, Percy objects. In the previous timeline, the trio had gone camping, insofar as running from the Death Eaters with a magical tent could count as camping. Percy had heard some of the story, of course, but not all of it. Presumably after Dumbledore's death, they'd be unable to return safely to Grimmauld Place and instead traipsed around the country. They would not have been alone in that. Plenty of Muggleborns had similar stories from that year, particularly now that they have the locket. But presumably Sirius has some way to destroy it. Andromeda certainly did. And we shan't know. Bloody nuisance, Severus mutters to himself, though it seems more automatic than fevered. Percy watches his sallow face contort and speaks up before he can convince himself not to pry. I'm sorry about Dumbledore. Severus' face twists and blackens instantly, and Percy hastens to keep talking. I'm sorry you had to be the one to kill him. I know that could not have been easy, and I wish you did not have to do it. I hated him, hisses Severus, but Percy has enough experience with hate by this point to guess at the undercurrents of what may be causing Severus, self-loathing, an instinctive lash of anger. Severus may have hated Dumbledore, but Dumbledore, like Tom, was an intoxicating wizard, and for years he must have trusted Severus as he trusted few others. Certainly by asking Severus to kill him and then take over as headmaster of Hogwarts indicated the tenor of Dumbledore's feelings toward him. I know, Percy says softly. I'm sorry that you had to hate him, too. Severus gives him such a scorching, searing look that it still burns faintly in Percy's mind. Several hours later, as he tucks himself into the bundle of blankets in his bed and stares at the ceiling. To turn his mind away from Severus, he turns it back toward the problem of Harry, locked like a dragon in a cave of his own making. Given that Sirius is alive, he has no reason to leave 12 Grimmauld Place, and Percy has no idea how to get word to any of the trio. He tries sending an owl, but the letter is returned, unopened. Likely the Black Place is unplottable. He'd never been anywhere in Grimmauld aside from the kitchen and that nasty dark room where they'd confronted Tom. But Percy does manage to find Grimmauld Place on a map and spends an uncomfortable evening in the rain waiting to see if they appear in the space between 10 and 14. Muggles are incredibly unobservant. Why would 12 be missing? To say that Tom is incensed at the loss of the locket would be a massive understatement. Percy eyes the portrait with trepidation, but though Tom nearly screams in agonized rage, the frame contains the swell of magic that Percy can feel faintly through his mark. But when Tom accuses Percy of losing the locket, like it is nothing more than a mere trinket, like Percy had just stood by and watched Harry Potter make off with one of the precious pieces of Tom's soul, Percy cannot sit idly by and take the accusation. His fingers curl into fists despite himself, and his magic sparks angrily around him. Don't you dare, he snaps back, unknowingly taking a step forward so that his nose nearly brushes the paint. I'm trying, Tom. Yaxley was there, and 3 bloody Dementors, and Sirius Black. Or would you have preferred I tip off the Dark Lord to precisely what we're trying to accomplish? I don't think he'll be too happy to have you return to a body. Tom scoffs, the sound harsh and guttural, so unlike Tom's normal silky tones that it sounds as if his anger pulls the noise unbidden from his throat. The Dark Lord will not dare to say anything to me when I return. But Percy hears the faint note of concern in Tom's voice, and it galls him on. Do you think you'll just be able to waltz in there and announce to the Dark Lord that you're taking over his operations? He's liable to kill you right then and there. Maybe I'll kill him first. You do that, point a wand at your own soul and banish it forever, Percy says goadingly, shaking his head. I know you, Tom, and if there's any chance you can get your soul out of his body, you're going to take it. If I have the locket, I won't need his soul, says Tom boldly. But now what, Tom? Sirius Black has taken the locket into his cave like a bloody dragon. Even the Dark Lord himself cannot get into Grimmauld Place. Are you sure we can't use the 6th Horcrux? I'm sure, says Tom venomously, before some of the anger melts from his face. He gives Percy a sideways glance and then turns to face the painted bookshelf behind him, a rougher rendering than the original portrait Percy had done, but still sufficient to allow Tom's magic to bring books to life. I have a strong suspicion of what the 6th Horcrux may be, and we will not be able to use it. Why not? Questions Percy immediately. Tom, if you know what it is, that's brilliant. It can't be harder to get than the locket. You can't get it. Percy cannot help himself. The noise of incredulity he makes is loud and rude and as guttural as Tom's scoff just moments prior. You don't trust me, he says flatly. Still, Merlin, Tom, what do I have to do to prove myself to you? You cannot get the last Horcrux, says Tom, angrily, over-enunciating each word so that each lands like a slap on Percy's skin, because it is his bloody snake, and he keeps it next to him at all times. Percy takes a step back. What? The 6th Horcrux, Tom says. The snake. The snake, Percy thinks of Nagini, always coiled affectionately around Voldemort's body, and shudders with instinctive horror. The snake. Can you even make a living being a Horcrux? It is entirely foolhardy, Tom hisses, and only then does Percy notice how utterly incensed the portrait is, how the very frame sparks with released magic. The snake. No wonder Tom had not said anything. The idea that Voldemort made his pet snake one of his beloved Horcruxes, it's quite frankly embarrassing, and Percy knows in a flash that the faint pink stain on Tom's neck is nothing more than shame that his counterpart had been so foolish. Unless, if the snake is a Horcrux, would that make it immortal? Her life is prolonged, but not eternal, unless he was foolish enough to make his pet a Horcrux of her own, Tom bites out. She is protected, but not invulnerable. A snake. How do you know? Percy asks skeptically. Why would Voldemort entrust part of his soul into a vulnerable living being? No matter how the Dark Lord protects the snake, at some point it would die of old age, and then what would he do? Can you extract the Horcrux? Tom shakes his head. His left hand is clenched, and Percy watches warily as he squeezes his hand tighter, and the veins on his painted arm bulge angrily. The ritual I devised relies on inert vessels. Are you stupid, Weasley? The life force of the snake would corrupt the structural integrity of the layering spells. That seems out of character for him, Percy says carefully. It's utterly absurd. Tom explodes. What is he thinking? I have suspected for quite a while that something is not normal with that creature, but it passed by my portrait today and I felt myself inside it. It is a Horcrux, Percy. I know it is. Percy shakes his head. But why? It's utterly illogical, Tom. He cares for it, Tom hisses venomously, and Percy suddenly understands why Tom is so very upset. Tom, as far as Percy knows, has never had a pet or an intimate friend or even a trusted partner. Tom, as far as Percy knows, views this as a strength. To think that he grew into the kind of person who would care for an animal so deeply as to entrust his soul within its life force would justify every paranoid thought Tom has ever had, and so strikingly highlight the difference between the diadem Tom and the current Tom. And you cannot kill the snake without killing the Horcrux, Percy says thoughtfully. So they will have to kill the snake too, which is, as Tom pointed out, a more impossible task than tracking down the locket, even with the Black family wards. The Dark Lord cares for Nagini like it is of his own soul, which now, Percy has to acknowledge, it rather is. Can we extract the Horcrux from the snake? How did he even put the Horcrux into the snake? I hope it was an accident, Tom says with a bitter laugh, his robes whirling around him as he turns away from the shelf of painted books. I cannot imagine any version of me would have done such an act on purpose. If I try to attack the snake, I risk killing the soul fragment therein rather than the beast. But to extract it will most certainly kill the snake, and as you said, he will already be predisposed to mistrust me. Something about Tom's words echo in Percy's head, and he sits suddenly on the couch, nearly missing it and crashing on the ground, his face growing pale as all of his blood deserts him, along with his courage and his capacity for speech. An accident. Percy takes a series of deep breaths, focusing on the wooden legs of his kitchen table and staring intently at his chair until the image is seared into his head. His heart is stuttering oddly in his chest, and he feels alternately warm and cold. An accident. Power the Dark Lord knows not. Percy, says Tom calmly. Too calmly, Percy raises his panicked eyes to meet Tom's, who is leaning forward and staring intently at him. What did you just realize? I'm wrong, gasps Percy, feeling his throat begin to constrict around the truth, bubbling up his vocal cords, begging to be said out loud. Let me verify it, and then I will tell you, Tom. No, says Tom coolly. You will tell me now, or I will kill your father. Percy shakes his head. Even the threat to his father cannot faze him. Oh, Merlin, it is all so stunningly clear to him, all so bloody obvious, but in Merlin's name he has absolutely no idea what to do next. I can't, Tom. You will tell me now, or your father will die, and Severus after him, and your mother next, hisses Tom, and Percy's mark jumps with a pulse of Tom's rage. Can he tell Tom? But if Tom kills Harry before the Dark Lord can, or kills the Dark Lord first? A tangle in his mind, but the words are still pushing at him, insisting they be divulged and soon. All except the last one, says Harry, his eyes distant. That one required me. But surely Harry had not known. Harry had been alive. Harry had lived through the final battle. He'd killed Voldemort, not the other way around. So perhaps in his timeline it had not been over. What is it? Tom nearly howls in irritation, and Percy looks up, his lips moving, as if controlled by someone else. I think Harry Potter is a Horcrux, Tom. Tom's rage surges through the room as if it were a being of its own. Percy gasps around the cold, icy feeling of the Horcruxes' magic lashing out, struggling to speak through it. He speaks parcel tongue when he should not, he continues laboriously. He can see into your mind through his dreams. We know you went to his house that night with the sword of Gryffindor, intending to use his death to create your last Horcrux, but something went wrong, and you were felled for 11 years. It was an accident, like it may have been with Nagini. It's too many Horcruxes, Tom. Who knows what might happen if the Dark Lord were to try to create another? Magic has a mind of its own sometimes. We both know that. Some of the oppressive presence of Tom's magic recedes, and Percy massages his throat, coughing. Whether it had been wrong or right for him to tell Tom was in the past now. He'd made his choice, and now he must stick to it. Harry Potter is descended from the Gryffindor line, I think, Percy says into the silence. He is your mirror. His mother experimented with dangerous magic, blood magic. There was a prophecy about him. I do now know what precisely caused the effect that you experienced, but I believe the ritual failed, or the sword rejected your soul, and your soul buried itself into his body. If I kill him, I will destroy myself. But if I let him live, then I shall fear the prophecy for the rest of my days, Tom says, his voice raw and hoarse. The portrait has stopped glowing. In fact, the explosion of magic seems to have weakened Tom, whose face is now pale and washed out, more clearly that of paint and not of flesh. And, Percy points out, more pragmatically, he will die anyway if he is not immortal. Tom barks out a rusty laugh, so unlike his normal smooth, cultured tones that Percy flinches at the incongruity of it. Even as a portrait, Tom is the most powerful person in the room. Percy almost cannot bear the occasional reminder that even at the core of it, he is nothing more than a mortal wizard. I hate him, he says with feeling. Harry. Him. Tom pushes himself to his feet and paces back and forth in the small area that Percy had created for him. I gave him everything, power, money, knowledge, followers. I built him an empire, and he balanced it on the lives of an infant and a snake. But you do not hate yourself? Percy asks tentatively. Tom gives him a derisive glare. He is not me, he proclaims. I am not him. He is a version of me, one possible future among many. I reject him, and I hate him, and I will not have him be my final legacy. But what are we going to do? Percy points out. 2 of 6, well, 7, Horcruxes will eventually die. 4 are destroyed or out of reach, and the last is you. I may be the last, but I am not inferior. Tom laughs again, but this time it is more silky, more confident. Percy relaxes around a tension he had not known he was holding. I need only a sliver of my soul to come into my inheritance. If I can destroy my soul, who is to say I cannot create more? But Percy begins automatically. The idea of creating a soul is so entirely absurd that he rejects it without thinking. Magic can neither be created nor destroyed. But what about souls? If a soul can be destroyed, a soul can be created. Tom has the smallest smirk on his face, and Percy realizes that this idea is not new. Perhaps Tom has been planning to create more of his soul since the moment he learned that part of it had been destroyed. I can practice on the snake. I believe I can absorb its soul into mine. That is incredibly dangerous, Percy feels compelled to point out. It is an animal. He does not state the obvious. Tom risks making the same mistake that the Dark Lord did, and Percy knows perfectly well how disgusted Tom is at Voldemort's snake-like visage. Given as he is liable to murder Potter the second he sees him, we cannot risk the boy, Tom snaps back. Perhaps that is the prophecy, Percy says thoughtfully, half to himself. Perhaps Voldemort does kill Harry, but kills only the portion of his soul. Or perhaps by killing Harry he kills himself. What Tom says is true. He could leave Harry alive, and therefore ensure his own immortality. He could make Harry a Horcrux of his own, and the two of them would live forever, inextricably linked, tied to each other's fate for all of history. While Voldemort is alive, Harry will be at risk. While Voldemort is alive, the prophecy remains. But if Tom chooses to reject the prophecy, if Tom chooses to protect Harry, to protect him as part of his own soul, the diadem provoked the diary. The diadem did not realize that the diary was an ally, and instead used the image of Dumbledore to provoke the diary into a tempting fiendfire. The diary attacked the diadem, and the diary was destroyed, and the diadem unharmed. So if Voldemort attacks Harry, perhaps all he will destroy is himself. But what if Tom tries to protect Harry? Would that help, or would that hurt? Maybe the soul that attacks is the one that will be destroyed. Or maybe the diadem survived over the diary due to the protections embedded in the object itself. Maybe the diadem survived because Percy had been there, and Percy had taken a vow to protect Tom's soul, and Percy had wrenched his hand away, and the diadem had survived. So if Tom wants to protect Harry, perhaps he could protect both Harry and the soul fragment. So Percy does not want Tom to protect Harry if it is true that Voldemort can destroy his soul but leave Harry alive. But if that premise fails, then perhaps Percy does want Tom to protect Harry. Or does he have it backwards? His head throbs. Between Harry and the Horcrux is more important, Percy reminds himself heavily. Harry would agree, or the version of Harry that Percy once knew, not yet 20 years old but burdened with a heavy destiny. What do you mean? Percy starts and then hastens to carefully explain. Tom knows only until the first few lines of the prophecy. But he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, he quotes, and then raises his eyebrows meaningfully. The Dark Lord knows not. He does not know he is a Horcrux, but you know. We must learn the rest of the prophecy, Tom says forcefully. Find out who made it and take me to them. Percy already knows the rest of the prophecy, the last crucial line, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. But what does that mean? Asterisk, to make a living thing a Horcrux, to accidentally make a Horcrux, to accidentally make a living thing a Horcrux. The thoughts bounce and circle inside Percy's head unrelentingly. He is unbelievably shocked. He is utterly and completely shocked. He'd known that Harry and Tom had a connection. He'd always meant to research it. And of course the boy had odd talents, like Parseltongue, but Percy had never entertained the idea that Harry was a Horcrux. What he cannot accept is that in his timeline, Harry had been alive. So either Harry had figured out a way to kill the Horcrux without killing himself, not impossible, but improbable, if predicated by the assumption that Harry was the master of death, or in his timeline, the Dark Lord truly had not been gone. It takes days for him to wrap his mind around it, so busy is he at the ministry, carefully laying a trap around his colleagues. He writes Pew's speeches and oversees the creation of the new Aura task force, and generally keeps his face cold and blank and dangerous. And inside his head, he cannot get over the sheer audacity of Dumbledore inadvertently revealing to Severus that Harry Potter, boy who lived, is a Horcrux. If Harry Potter is a Horcrux, it almost certainly confirms that Tom had not made the sixth Horcrux before his death, which means that Tom likely made it immediately upon returning to life. 7 Horcruxes then. So perhaps Tom could continue making Horcruxes unimpeded as long as he had strength of will. Unless the snake had been an accident, which could mean the Dark Lord has accidentally created more Horcruxes. At the ministry, Percy says nothing as Pew's announces to the gathered employees that the new slogan of the ministry is magic is might. He wonders idly who had suggested that the first time. Lucius, probably. He continues to say nothing as Pew's unveils the new statue in the atrium and then personally wards each of the flue gates against unwanted visitors, posing for photographs at each one. Bertha. Percy remembers suddenly what Barty Crouch had said all those years ago, his eyes gleaming with delight. He needed an innocent. Had he used Bertha to create a Horcrux, or just killed her when she got caught in the crossfire? It takes Percy an embarrassingly long time to work up the courage to see the Dementor again. He tries to console himself by reminding himself that, more likely than not, the Dementor must have fled post-haste after feeding on his gruesome prize. There's really nothing to be worried about, Percy's unreliable patroness notwithstanding, though he can't help but think to himself that he does not, strictly speaking, know what an unfettered Dementor may do, given the freedom. And if several of Percy's nightmares over the last week have had to do with the ragged black cloaks of the Dementors trailing on Umbridge's fleshy body as they linger hungrily over her form, with the thought of his own soul rising up through his throat and hovering in front of his mouth, to be swallowed greedily by a creature of death, well, he does not think of those after he wakes, panting, to vomit over the side of his bed with a wretched series of noises. Those are nightmares for the night, and by the time dawn warms the white walls of his bedroom, there is only a faint, acrid smell remaining to suggest anything was once amiss. But work up the courage he does, and to his utter surprise, when he pushes open the door to the room just beyond the holding cells, holding his breath and averting his eyes as he rushes past the rows of poor caught Muggleborns, caught in the indecision of where Yaxley and Percy should send them without trial. He sees the Dementor that he recognizes, along with the two smaller ones floating just out of reach. They regard each other silently. Percy cannot make out the specifics of the Dementor's face. Its hood reveals only an ominous, dark emptiness, and only the slight tilt in the Dementor's head suggests that it recognizes Percy too. Plainly, it will be up to Percy to say something. He takes a moment to search for his courage, hiding beneath the lower half of his spine, and spread it over his shoulders, as if scraping smidgen of jam over a warmed piece of toast. And then he speaks. I've discovered 2 more Horcruxes. The last 2 Merlin willing. The Dementor's voice, insofar as it is a voice, echoes evenly in Percy's mind. Why have you come to me? Percy clenches his toes tightly. What do you mean? You fear me now where you did not before. Percy flushes despite himself. Instruments of fear, he supposes, would be well disposed to identifying sources of fear in others, but he had hoped his unease would not be quite so obvious. It shocked me, he says, a trifle defensively, to see you feed on Madame Umbridge. The Dementor does not reply. Something like amusement fills Percy's mind, though it is a cold sort of amusement, and it makes him shiver despite himself. I will not apologize for my actions. I'm not asking you to, Percy exclaims, before pulling himself up short. Perhaps he was expecting an apology, as ridiculous a sentiment as that would be. But why would the Dementor hesitate, when the instrument to its freedom presented itself so neatly in front of it? Is it any different from a cat chasing a mouse, or a wizard killing a muggle without any choice? Percy reminds himself bitterly. Perhaps he had wanted an apology, but equally so, he can see it would be unfair to ask for it. I'm not asking you to, he says again, but more calmly this time. But to see it occur in front of me did shock me, and I will not apologize to that either. The fear of my own soul being taken like that is as much in my nature as your actions were in yours. Now the amusement that Percy can feel in his mind vibrates, as if the Dementor is chuckling. Then you may ask what you came here to ask, wizard. Why are you still here? Percy cannot help but ask, curiously, though of course he has more pressing matters to attend to, namely the 2 living Horcruxes they must now track down and remove safely. You are free, aren't you? I am free, the Dementor affirms, with a surprisingly graceful bow of its head. But the witch's soul was weak and injured, and she was close to her natural time of death. The magic from her death was barely enough to free me from my bonds. It was not sufficient for the others that are bound with me. The Dementors. Children, or whatever they are. Percy nods in sudden understanding, though the scholarly part of his mind itches to investigate further. So a soul of varying quality and strength releases different magic upon its death. Did that suggest Tom had a particularly strong soul? I will try, Percy says softly, looking at the 2 younger Dementors as they swoop and soar overhead. I do not know when or how, but I will try. The Dementor's confusion feels to Percy rather like its amusement, like a ripple in Percy's mind. Why? I will help you, for what you have told me bears taking action. Percy gives a little shrug of his shoulders. I have done worse things for my own family, he says, scratching awkwardly at the hairs prickling on his neck. I understand what it is like to feel like you need to protect them. They manage to move past this conversational quagmire by refocusing on the issue of the 2 Horcruxes. Percy explains the new problem, that the Dark Lord had embedded slivers of his soul in 2 living creatures, one of which must continue to live, if possible, when the soul fragment is removed. I have never heard of such a thing, says the Dementor with ominous anger. Percy chokes past the sound of his mother's sobbing and tries to continue focusing on the Dementor, now hovering further off the ground, the bottom of its robes whirling in an invisible wind. To corrupt a living being in such a way. It is an abomination, and it must be removed. Do you think the soul can be removed without harming the person? Percy asks anxiously. He doesn't even know that he's a Horcrux. Percy stops, suddenly thinking about this. Does Harry know? Surely not. Surely Harry does not know that his own soul is housing part of the darkest wizard of their time, but perhaps he suspects. Then he shakes his head. It is immaterial whether Harry knows or not. Percy cannot imagine that Harry knows how to remove it, save to kill himself, and Percy would really rather that not happen. I will find them, these abominations, and I will see them myself, the Dementor intones solemnly, like a vow. Percy nods, feeling awed despite himself. He wonders if Tom ever spoke to a Dementor, though he can't imagine Tom would have ever thought to communicate with a dark creature like it was an equal. Percy can barely believe it of himself. Then the Dementor swoops closer to Percy. Percy shivers, both at the increased cold and at the shock of the Dementor's attention. You have not discovered what your own soul contains. Contains? Percy queries nervously. The Dementor does not respond, merely hovers silently in front of Percy, and he continues defensively. I tried. Everything. Meditations, potions, magic. I thought I saw something, once, but I'm not sure if I just imagined it. You are not willing to do what it would take to free me, says the Dementor, conversationally. Percy flinches and bows his head. He knows his own failings, but to hear the creature say it too is uncomfortably haunting. But then, the Dementor extends a skeletal hand out of its long, tattered robe, the bones flexing and unfurling as it reaches out, palm up, in Percy's field of vision. Laying in the center of the Dementor's bone-white palm is a dark grey stone. But you are young, and you have much still to learn. Percy, glancing nervously at the Dementor's hooded face, reaches out and takes the stone. It is small, almost more of a jagged pebble than a stone, and though it looks as if the rough edges ought to be sharp, it is impossibly smooth, like burnished glass. Raising it to his face, he peers at it closely. The inside of the stone looks like very thick fog, or perhaps mist, or dark water sliding over the surface of a moonlight lake. A lake like the one at Hogwarts, perhaps, which Percy had seen one too many times during a late-night walk, staring contemplatively at the placid surface until a tentacle slides out of its depths to disturb the reflected moon. Next to the great lake were a great number of large evergreen trees, their trunks wide and ancient, their branches spreading leaves over the lake and nearly blocking out the sky. And in the center of the stone, Percy fancies he can see dozens of small lights, almost like lit windows in a large round tower. Percy yelps as the Dementor reaches out with one finger and prods his hand sharply. It will help you, it explains, as Percy wrenches his attention away from the small figure of Hogwarts that had begun to appear in the stone's gleaming surface. It will help you to see what lies beneath. Percy burns with curiosity about the stone, but he cannot examine it more thoroughly until he's dispensed of the rest of his workday, renewed the curse on pews under Yaxley's close supervision, bullied the guard in the holding cells into providing fresh food for the inmates, claiming that he has been ordered to interrogate them in the upcoming days, and therefore will need them to be fed and capable of sustained concentration, checked fruitlessly in Moody's old office for any sign of him or Tonks, and choked down a dry, wilted salad nearly to the end of its preservation charm, chosen from the motley selection in his enchanted ice box in his kitchen. Tom is not present, which works well for Percy's purposes. As is his custom, he sits in bed, after first indulging in a long and steaming hot shower to wash off the filth of the day. He'd purchased entirely new bedding, and while this one is not quite as comfortable as what he'd used to have, it comforts him, in an obscure sort of way, to know that these sheets do not hold the memory of the last few years of night terrors, nor of Tom. And then he looks at the stone. The way that it glitters is rather familiar, not to mention again those strange, jagged edges that pebble smoothly under his finger. If the stone were crimson, he'd believe instantly it was a piece of the philosopher's stone, though where that glowed with a strange fiery ember, this one seems to be lit by a bit of captured moonlight. Of course, without the philosopher's stone at hand, Percy cannot be precisely sure, but he will have to remember to show Severus when he next receives the chance. As he'd done earlier, he looks deeply at the stone, and recalls again the great lake in Hogwarts, and the beautiful trees he'd been so fond of at the edge of the forbidden forest, and the way smoke curled out of Hagrid's hut, drifting over the large, lazy pumpkins spilling over the ridge of the hill. His nose flares unconsciously as he thinks of his lynx form nosing through the giant vegetables, and then lightly trotting up the stone stairs and across the outdoor corridor, which he runs across lightly and silently. He skirts the edges of the courtyard in front of the large wooden doors. Above, the clock tower chimes, sonorous and stately, and Percy enters the door, walks past the great hall, and goes up and up and up, the staircases moving creakily beneath his feet. And then somehow, implausibly, he's stepping into the Gryffindor common room, his feet taking him automatically to his old dorm, but the entire room is empty. In fact, Percy suddenly realizes that he is standing inside Hogwarts, and nobody is there, except for him. He reaches out with a trembling hand, but the soft velvet chair in front of him feels real. Except, somewhere in Percy's awareness, he can feel the sheets over his legs, and the stone in his palm, and the faint sound of wind against his window. "I'm inside my soul, I think," he says out loud, and then laughs with incredulity, almost giddy, as the thought registers itself more firmly in his mind. "I'm inside my soul." But there are differences, Percy notices quickly, bounding with energy from one room to the next. The common room is darker than he remembered, the fire burning low, and on the wall opposite to the table where Percy used to study, a large dark slash mars the maroon wallpaper. There are other damages, seemingly arbitrary. A broken-down bed in his old bedroom, burned chairs in the Transfiguration classroom, a suit of armor laying in pieces in the corridor, its sword hanging uselessly from one glove, and its gleaming helmet a few steps away. In fact, the damages look familiar. In fact, Hogwarts looks very much like it had, the night after the final battle, when Percy walked alone through the darkened halls, reeling with grief. When Percy looks up, he is unsurprised to see that he is standing where he'd stood, that fateful day, with a clear line of vision to the patch of stones that had marked Fred's final resting place. There, seared into the wall, is the scar from the curse that ended his brother's life. When Percy looks down, he sees that vines have grown over his feet, anchoring him in place, as sturdy and impenetrable as Percy's own hesitation all those years ago. To kill is to damage your soul, Percy thinks, but what does it do to damn another to death? "I'm trying, Freddy," Percy whispers, looking at the almost brutal way the curse scar melts into the stone. "I haven't been standing still, I promise. Well, to be honest, I'm not sure if anything that I'm doing has helped very much at all. But I'm trying." "Are you?" inquires Tom, his voice sounding very much to Percy like he is standing right behind him. Percy whips himself around to check, but his feet are still anchored to the ground, and so he can only catch a glimpse of a blurred form fading into the shadows. "Tom, do you know what your soul contains?" the Dementor asks with something like pity. "Percy." "Tom." Percy wrenches his feet free, kicking away the vines savagely, and takes off at a run. He skids around the corner and dashes down the corridor, his footsteps echoing loudly in the darkened halls, but he can see no sign of Tom, nor hear him, nor sense anything else at all. He comes to a halt, chest heaving, glancing around nervously. Maybe he'd imagined it. Of course he'd think of Tom here, confronting where a version of Tom had laid Percy's entire world nearly to ruin. He's imagining it, like he'd imagined it all those other times. And it's been so long since Percy has heard Tom's voice in his head. Months at the very least, if not longer. Or perhaps he's hearing the portrait Tom out in the other room. A crinkle of paper answers Percy's frenzied questions, and his heartbeat slows as he looks down and finds himself holding a map. His map, Percy's map, Myrtle's map, not the Marauder's map. There in the corner is the careful rendering Percy had done of Myrtle, where on the Marauder's map there was a crest of arms with whiskers and horns and the ragged full moon. Percy's eyes travel over the map slowly, as his heartbeat seems to thud louder, until all around him, all he can hear is the loud, rhythmic pulsing sound of his own anticipation. Percival Weasley Pruett, he's alone. Percy exhales in relief, and maybe disappointment. But then he hears a shadow of mocking laughter, and on the opposite side of the map, another name briefly flickers into being. Tom Marvolo Riddle, but as Percy watches, Tom's name flashes once and disappears, and Percy is left alone, holding a map of his own imagination and staring out at the darkened shadows of his own soul.